Hi, welcome to another video tutorial on the web application NetChecklist.com. In this video I'm going to talk about how to use checklists by copying them in the application. So again, I've logged in as our fictitious user named Bob Broker, who is a manager of the fictitious real estate company called Ready Real Estate, and here we are on Bob's homepage for this organization. Now, the way you use a checklist in this application is by copying it to the actual task list. Remember that items on a checklist are not on the task list. A checklist is like a blank form that you use over and over by making copies of it. So you make copies of checklists on the Copy Checklist to Task List page, and there are actually several different ways you can get to this page. The first way is to come up here beside Checklists and select the first item, Copy Checklist to Task List, and that gets us to the page right here. Once you get to this page, the first thing you select is the name of the checklist that you want to make a copy of. You obviously have to know that. And the second thing that you have to select is the project you want to copy the checklist to the task list for. In this application, all of the items on the task list must be assigned to a project. So you have to select a project that you're copying the task list for. Remember, the point of creating checklists is to be able to use them over and over again for different projects that you're working on. So it makes sense that each time you copy the checklist, you have to specify the project that you're copying it for. Now we can select a project from the drop down here. If the project that you want to copy it for doesn't exist, you would have to create the project first and then come back to this page. Now, there are two more fields on this form, but before we cover those, I'm going to go back and cover the two other ways that you can get to this form. And I'll go ahead and tell you right now, one of the ways to get here has to do with this field, the checklist name, and the other has to do with this project name field. So I'm going to cancel out of this, and when I do, we're taken back to the home page for this organization. And if you look right over here on the right, there is a link. Okay, the first way we got to our copy checklist page was up here. On this page, there's a link, and this is on several pages. These items in the sidebar kind of vary depending on which page you're on. And this one that says Copy Checklist to Task List, it opens an accordion menu that contains a list of all of the checklists that belong to this organization. So you can open it, you can click it again to close it. And if we click one to select it, we are again taken to that Copy Checklist to Task List page, but this time the name of the checklist that we just clicked on is already selected for us. So that might be just a little bit quicker way to get here and already have your checklist name selected for you. So that's the second way you can get here. The third way has to do with the project field. And remember I said that if a project you want to copy the checklist for doesn't exist yet, that you have to create it first. Let's do that. Let's create a new project. There are two ways you can create a new project. If you're here and you realize your project doesn't exist yet, you do have a button right there that'll take you right to the Add New Project page. Or using the main menu, you can come up here under Projects. Either way, we get here to the Add a New Project button. And I'm going to, I've already entered this one time, so I can just select it. So I'm going to click one there, and I'm going to say Add Project. And when we do that, we're again immediately brought back to the Copy Checklist to Task List page. This time there's a note that says Project 232 Sunnydale Drive was added successfully. And this time that project is selected for us. The idea there is that if you create a new project, the first thing you're probably going to want to do is to copy a checklist for it. So let's leave that project selected and come up here and we'll select version 1 of our new listing for sale checklist. Now there are two more fields on this form. The first one, user assign, is required, and the checklist copy name down here is optional. Now for the user assign field this time around, I'm just going to select one of our agents. This actually is a list of the users who are members of your organization. So there's another video on managing users for your organization, but once someone's a member of your organization, they're going to show up in this list. So you can watch that video if you have questions on that. This time I'm just going to select Andy Agent, and I am going to come back and talk about that in more detail in just a minute. Now, The last field that's here is the checklist copy name, which is optional. And basically, the purpose of this field is to allow you to give a name to the set of tasks that belong to a given copy of a checklist. So I'm going to go into detail on this on another video, but and in that video I'll explain a situation where it would be necessary to use this field. Just know here that the system doesn't require you to enter anything into the field, but there are some situations where it will be necessary for you to use it. So once you've got the 3 mandatory fields filled out, we can just click Copy Checklist, and it goes pretty quick. And here it says that 1 checklist was copied successfully, 9 tasks were copied successfully, and we're going to go over these things in future videos. Now, this has brought us to what's called the checklists copied page, checklists that have been copied in the past. Now, there's going to be another video on this page, but while we're here, I'm going to just touch on a couple of things about it. If you use this application very much, you're probably going to find that this is a pretty useful page. And what it's showing us is the copies of checklists that exist in the database for the organization. So it's not the tasks that came from the copy. Those are on the task list. Each entry here represents a copy of a checklist. It lists the checklist copies in reverse chronological order of the date the copy was made, so the most recent copies are going to show up at the top. So here at the top we see this is the copy of that checklist that we just made. We see the name of the checklist that was copied, the name of the project that it was copied for. We see who that default user was. We see the copied date and time. And we see that on this one that 0 out of the 9 tasks for this group have been completed. So this is the group of tasks that was copied to the task list by this copy of this checklist. Down here we see a link to view these items and a link to delete this copy along with all of the items. The view this item link, it takes us back to the home page for the organization, the page that displays our task list. And once you get there, it filters the tasks on the task list to only show the tasks that were added to the task list by this copy of this checklist, which is what I call a task group. It's the group of tasks. But I'll go ahead and warn you up front that if you try that when you get to the task list, there's a pretty good chance that you won't see all of the tasks that belong to that checklist copy, and you'll probably think something isn't working correctly, but there are several reasons why that will happen, and I'll explain that in another video on this checklist copied page, so be sure to watch that video. The delete this copy and all of its items link does exactly what you'd expect it to do. It deletes it. So let's go back to look at these tasks on the home page for this organization, and if I click this, right now we actually only see one, and it is one assigned to Bob Broker. So, like I warned you, we're not seeing all 9 here, we're only seeing one. And the reason it's only showing Bob's task is because by default the application only shows tasks assigned to the currently logged in user, who is in this case Bob Broker. But if we come up here to our task sort and filter options, because Bob has a high enough level of user rights in this organization, Bob can go see tasks assigned to any user. So here we're going to change our filtering to see tasks for all users, and when we do that we're going to click Update Task Sorting and Filtering, and now we do see all 9 tasks. And if we look at them, we see this was assigned to Andy Agent. We see who the different tasks are assigned to. We see all of those items. And down here is that last one. That was the only one on the list that was assigned to Bob. So we've copied our first checklist, and that's all there is to it. Let's look while we're here, and we're going to go back now and talk more about that user assigned field a little bit more. Notice here that all of these items are assigned to Andy Agent, except for add the property to the company website, which is assigned to Wally Webmaster. Make a file for the new listing is assigned to Sally Secretary, and review file and web page for accuracy and completeness is assigned to Bob Broker. With that in mind, let's come back over to our checklist page and let's look at version 1 of that checklist. That's the one that we just made the copy of. And if we look at the items on this checklist, we see the users assigned on these items are exactly who was assigned on the task list. So the system did exactly what it was supposed to do. It was supposed to do. It assigned these users to the items on the checklist. The problem with this, however, is that Andy Agent, who was assigned to this, he's not the only agent in our company. We also have another agent named Angie Agent. And what we really need to be able to do is assign these tasks to whichever agent is working on that particular transaction. These tasks aren't always specific to him. They need to be assigned to whichever agent is working on that individual transaction. So what we really need to be able to do is to assign these tasks to whichever agent is working on a particular transaction. So right now we couldn't really use this checklist for a listing that Angie is working on because it would assign all the tasks that need to be assigned to her to Andy. Now we could come in here and edit each one of these and change it, but you wouldn't want to do that every time, and you also wouldn't want to have to try to keep a separate checklist for each agent. That wouldn't be very good either. So that's what this user assigned field is for. So let's go back to our checklist copied page, which we can get to right here. And since we're done working with this, let's go ahead and delete this copy. And so it deleted all of those items. And now let's come to our checklist page and let's look at version 2 of that same checklist. So if we look at these items, now all of these items, instead of being assigned to Andy, they're assigned to someone named assign user when copying checklists, except add the property to the company website is still assigned to Wally Webmaster, make a file for the listing is still assigned to Sally Secretary, and review file and web page for accuracy and completeness is still assigned to Bob Broker. Everything else is assigned to this user. We've left these assigned to these specific users because no matter which agent is working on a transaction, these items are always going to be assigned to these users, so those are not going to change. So this user called assign user when copying checklists is not a real user. It's sort of a pseudo user, and it can only be assigned to tasks on a checklist. It cannot be assigned to tasks on the actual task list, and using it allows us to dynamically assign some or all of the tasks on a checklist to a certain specified user each time the checklist is used. So again, this user cannot be assigned to tasks on the task list, only to tasks on a checklist. So you can still assign something on a checklist to a real user, and when you do, then that user will be assigned to that task every time the checklist is copied. But assigning it to our pseudo user allows us to determine who those tasks will be assigned to each time the checklist is copied. So let's make another copy of our checklists. Let's come here and say copy checklist, and this time use version 2. So this time let's select our 123 anywhere drive, and so last time we selected Andy but kind of skipped over it. So this right here, when we're making a copy of the checklist, this is where we decide which member of our organization we want to dynamically assign to those tasks that are assigned to assign user when copying checklist. So let's make a copy of this again. This time we've selected Angie and make a copy of the checklist. And again, one checklist was copied, 9 tasks were copied successfully. And if we view the items, this time these were all assigned to Angie Agent. But again, when we get down here, this was still assigned to Wally Webmaster, this to Sally Secretary, and this to Bob Broker. So let's go now. These all went to Angie Agent. So let's go make another one. And this time, let's use version 2 again. And here, let's select that one. That's fine. And this time we'll do Andy Agent and copy again. And So here's this one. And if we view those items, here we see Andy Agent, Andy, and then again, Wally Webmaster was assigned to adding the property to the company website, Sally Secretary, and Bob. So everything is working exactly like we expect it to. So, this is a feature that I think can be very useful for many different types of organizations. A service company that had different service personnel that they would need to be able to assign certain tasks for, for a given job that they're sending them out to. This would be useful for them. And then if the secretary or a dispatcher and somebody in the office always needs to do certain tasks, then again, just like with Bob Broker and the secretary, they can always be assigned to certain tasks. Also, maybe like an accounting firm would need to be able to assign certain tasks to whichever one of their staff accountants is working with a certain customer. So there are a lot of situations where I think that feature will be useful. So before we finish up, I just want to quickly make you aware of one other feature that's also sort of related to dynamically assigning tasks to different members of your organization, but this one works a little bit differently. I'm going to come back to our checklist page and let's go to version 2 of our checklist, and let's select this item, and here is where it's assigned to assign user when copying checklist. And you may have noticed it before when we were here before that there is actually another suspicious user showing up in this drop down list called assign user by job. And as you may have suspected, that is another pseudo user who also can only be assigned to task on a checklist, not to task on the actual task list. And like I said, I am going to cover this in another video, but just know that in this context, a job doesn't represent a job as in a job that you're working on, like a project for a specific customer. This represents a job in the context of a job that someone does. Like Wally has the job of webmaster, Sally has the job of secretary, Bob has the job of broker. So just keep in mind that that is an option that's available, and we're going to come back to that in another video. So now, not only do you know how to create a checklist, you know how to make copies of them, and we even know how to dynamically assign tasks to different members of the organization, but there are still several extremely important and useful features about copying checklists that we haven't covered. One of the most important of those is task dependencies, which we're going to cover in the next video.